Welcome to I Got a Guy podcast, a podcast carefully designed to introduce a wide range of very talented and highly skilled professionals ready to share their knowledge and advice with you. Please welcome the host of I Got a Guy podcast, Michael Drelichars. Welcome to I Got a Guy podcast. I'm your host, Michael Drelichars. Thank you so much for being here. To our loyal listeners and subscribers, we really appreciate you listening again today. We know you're getting some great information. We have such a wide range of guests that we have had on the show, and today is no different. So I know you get some more really valuable information. If you are new to I Got a Guy podcast, we welcome you. And if you want to hear any of our past episodes, I encourage you to go to igotaguypodcast.com. That's igotaguypodcast.com. You'll see a list of all of our past episodes with a little synopsis of each one of our episodes, so you'll be able to see which ones best fit your need at the moment. It'd be great if you listen to all of them, but if you want to pick and choose what's best for you, that's fine too. And if you have any suggestions, or if you'd like to be a guest on I Got a Guy podcast in the future, you can certainly reach out to us through our contact page on the website. So I encourage you to reach out to us that way as well. Many of you know that I Got a Guy podcast was born out of reading a book called The Go-Giver. Bob Burg is the author of that book. It's an awesome book, and it really talks about how small businesses grow not through getting referrals, but through giving referrals. And it's got some really amazing stories woven throughout that book. And there's 5 laws of stratospheric success that are outlined in the book. And oftentimes, as you know, I like to highlight one of those laws and how it relates to our guest for the week. And this week, the law I'm going to touch on is called the law of influence. And it's defined by your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interest first. Your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interest first. And I think when you get to know our guest today, you'll get to see how that correlates with her personality and her business acumen and how she serves her clients. So I would like to welcome our guest this week. We have Ann Viner from Corporate Law Partners. And welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about Corporate Law Partners.
Well, Corporate Law Partners is a small law firm. We actually have 3 offices. Our home office, if you will, is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our office here in Chicago, and then we also have an office in Stamford, Connecticut. I'm a founder of this firm, along with my partner in Minnesota. We founded the firm in 2016. My background, briefly, is I had grown up in law firms, over 100 attorney law firms, so fairly large firms. I had gone in-house to be an in-house general counsel for one of my clients. They were being sold. So I said to my CEO, I'd like to be your outside general counsel because I don't want to be sold out of a job if the new buyer probably isn't going to need me. So I said, I'll find someplace to be your outside general counsel. So I founded this firm with my partner, like-minded. And what we really kind of wanted to do was do something different.
Okay.
We wanted to sort of strip away a lot of the overhead, the marble secretarial stations, the big fancy conference rooms that we all had kind of grown up in big firms. The technology was working, to work from home. When I was in-house general counsel, it was for a company based in the East Coast, and I still worked from home from Chicago. So this was pre-pandemic. So we knew we could do it. And our idea was that we could pass along the cost savings of having the lower overhead and be nimble and flexible in our rates and how we could work from anywhere, anytime, and really be at a client's or not be, and just provide some of those cost efficiencies, technology efficiencies onto our client base.
Sure.
Instead of making everybody go. And so this was pre-pandemic. And so people kind of thought we were a little crazy. And then when the pandemic hit, we looked brilliant. But that's who we are. We were really founded in Midwestern values of honesty, integrity, responsiveness, and really, frankly, caring about our clients and their problems. I would say the other thing is that a number of our lawyers have been actually in house general counsel. So we've sat in the C suite, we've been in the budget meetings, we understand strategic planning. And that really, as lawyers, then allows us to really think like business people, and really partner with our clients on those issues. And just to your point about the Go Giver quote, one of the things that a good networking pal of mine always says is we help our clients with maybe 20% of their problems, and they talk to us or complain about the other 80%. And so we at Corporate Law Partners like to act as outside general counsel to our clients so that we're the first call. They have a problem with their fleet, for example, right? They've got trucks being stolen, they've got problems. Well, now I can say, oh, wait, I got a guy, right?
There you go.
So we really do like to be that referral source.
Hmm.
Sometimes clients have outgrown their insurance broker, their bookkeeping. They really need, a strategic CFO. We've got folks we can refer to them. And we like to just try to help as a team with them to do more. I mean, I'm an environmental construction lawyer. That's a niche. But I have clients that call me with all types of issues, and
Sure.
I can either refer them to somebody in my firm. And if we can't do it, we know great people who can. So
Sure.
that's kind of how we like to work.
That's great. Well, one thing that you mentioned that you by changing the paradigm, if you will, and you don't have the big fancy offices, you also can help clients that are not necessarily right in your backyard, right? So
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, as an environmental lawyer, I pretty much have always worked all over the country. I mean, it's a lot of federal law,
sure,
manufacturing clients or developer clients who are looking at contaminated properties kind of all over. Um, and so that's my practice has always been really national. But what it allows is for us to very easily, it's not a huge deal for me to go to Texas to look at a landfill site with a client who might want to develop it, and be gone for a couple of days from the office. My office is with me. I can work really well from anywhere.
yes,
And that I think is a differentiator. Maybe not so
sure,
much now after the pandemic. I think people are better about it, more easily working on the road. But I really can be handling matters for you and then get out of the car in Texas and walk the site and get back in the car and be working again on a matter for you. So
sure,
I think it's that. I think the technology works really well. And if you, I would, I don't want to disparage my fellow lawyers in any way, shape, or form, but and I put myself in this bucket. Most of us are not really good IT people. One of my partners really is and has sort of figured out a lot of our tech and has tried a lot of things and figured out what works and what doesn't.
sure,
But we're nimble because we're small. I'm not trying to figure out the tech for 500 lawyers. So
right,
so that's some of just it's sort of the fun part kind of having your own small business
sure,
is you can design the things that work for you and your client base, and if they don't work you can pivot pretty quickly. So
right. Yeah, and I too am a small business owner, and what I like about being a small business owner versus working in a larger corporation is being nimble, being able to be creative to your client's needs, and being responsive. It's not that your client has to fit into your box, but you can make your box whatever it fits for your clients, and however it serves them best. And
I
I
think
think
that's
that,
exactly right. Sorry.
yeah, I think it makes a big difference. And right now there's a lot of businesses that need that flexibility,
Oh,
and
I
be able
agree.
to serve in that way is good.
Right, I agree.
So,
So, we
so
do like to act as your outside general counsel, but many of my clients have actual inside general counsel. So maybe I act as their national environmental counsel, but it's what do you need from us? What do you need us to be? And if you need me to look at your insurance policy and advise you as to whether there's risks, I mean, I can do that. But I'm also going to make sure that you get the right professional broker or, folks looking at that too. Um, I don't say, oh, I don't do that. I'm an environmental lawyer, right? So we're trying to always
right,
answer the question, make the referral, and provide what they're really looking for. I mean, my job is to find creative, cost-effective legal solutions for what can be very complex problems, but what I want to do is try to break it down to simple steps. As an environmental lawyer, I like to say that I'm a translator, right? I'm translating a lot of big words, a lot of big laws, a lot of big, long, sciencey, concepts. Um, and I'm trying to translate that into what is the risk really? What's the cost? What's the timing? What does this mean to
right,
a judge, a jury, a buyer, a seller, a developer, a community stakeholder, a lender? Trying to kind of break it down to provide the answer, the solution that the client's looking for.
right. That makes a lot of sense. So, what type of clients do you work with generally? Let's start from a size perspective.
From a size perspective, it's anything from an individual, farmer to, large multinational chemical companies. So it really runs the gamut. Um, I work primarily, I would say, with manufacturers, um, developers, folks who own, buy, sell, manage real estate, because that's where environmental and construction comes in. You don't have environmental issues or construction issues if you don't have real estate. So that's the broad brush. I can kind of give you some examples of that range if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, we definitely. But the first point I wanted to touch on though is that you work with a small. You said a small farmer to large corporate. So it's you don't have a specific size. But
No.
let's good. Well, share some of your examples. I'd love to hear that.
Okay, so I'll give you the farmer example. Um, a family downstate, the the patriarch dad bought a lot of property. They were farmers, and he bought a lot of property. He passed away, and in going through his papers and estate, his son and wife found that he had literally bought this back 40 that they didn't even know he owned. So they take a drive back there to check out the property, and they find on the property some of the worst looking things I've ever seen. And I've seen lots of really bad looking stuff. Huge above ground tanks, huge, like almost they looked like basically the size of a rail car. Okay, like think
Mhm.
of and there were three of them side by side, rusted out, oozing, kind of some dried up, some oozed, like black tar essentially. And as it turned out, it was old road tar that a
Really?
construction company had just dumped on his back 40. So, um, through a real estate lawyer that I know downstate, they got referred to me. The widow was incredibly upset, really upset. She kept saying, I don't want to go to EPA jail. And I was like, you're not going to go to EPA jail. It'll be fine. We'll figure it out. Um, so I worked with a consulting firm. We went down, we sampled it. We figured out what it was. And then the question was, how do we get rid of it?
Sure.
You know, it's and these tanks were in the worst shape you can imagine, and it was just blobs of tar
Hmm.
that have been there for decades. So we actually, there's ways to dispose of things like that. To haul it off site, to get it all off was going to be really, really expensive. We actually contacted the counties around the farm and asked them, because they still use this stuff to spray on roads for dust suppression and country roads. So we looked around and we actually found a company that does this work, that does road work for the county. And they came and looked at it, and they had a system by which they could like heat it up and liquefy it and pump it into one of their vessels so that some of it could be reused. Not all of it, but some of it.
Wow.
So once we got the mass out of the shells of this decrepit, rusted through tanks, that took a huge amount of volume out of the cost of
Of course.
getting the folks in to dispose of it. So then we took the cost down, from astronomical to doable. We got the whole thing wrapped up in about, I would say, a month. And this widow was happy and she wasn't scared, and it didn't cost her an arm and a leg. And so that's what I mean about, so people find me because something, I always say, like, my trigger word, like, if you hear what's a word that if you hear it, you should think of me. I always say it's schmutz, anything that's kind of like, what is that? What am I supposed to do with that? Right. And it can be an asbestos problem in your building, a mold problem in your building. It can run the gamut from things like that to the other end of the spectrum. I have a developer client that buys landfills to put, in old contaminated industrial sites, like really bad old contaminated industrial sites. Demos whatever's there, cleans it up, builds something great. So really transformative from a taking blight and making something new and wonderful. I like to call it like blight to bright. And it's it's
Sure.
it's it's transformative for a community, right? Because now you've got investment. One
Absolutely.
big site goes away. A little town, in the middle of nowhere, Texas, loses their giant, ugly, old, abandoned industrial site. Or in the inner city of Chicago, development, economic growth, pride in the community is what follows. So those are
100%.
huge projects, which is very different from the lady downstate. But those are the kind of things that I end up working on. And I
Yeah.
like it.
Well,
I
yeah.
obviously like it.
Yeah. That's remarkable, and that is a really small niche. It seems like that you don't hear about too often. But when you think about, if there's contaminants that get into the soil and that, maybe have some carcinogens that could really harm people for decades to come, it's really important to get that cleared up not only does the community then not have this eyesore that has been sitting there for maybe decades, but it's not harming the community, it's not harming the residents or the future residents, and I
Right,
know that's a big deal.
right. And I mean, everything that basically I do as an environmental lawyer is aimed at resolving whatever the issue is. And even if it's a development, right? I mean, there's, we're stepping in, taking on liability, cleaning up somebody else's problem. But the goal is always protection of human health and the environment. And the laws require the protection of human health and the environment. And they're complicated. There's a lot of them. And there's various ways to accomplish the protection of human health and the environment. And, depending on which stakeholder you are, you may have a different view as to what should be done, all of which are allowed. There's options. It's not just one way to address a problem. So it's really kind of trying to accomplish that goal in the manner that meets not only my clients, but just like in the case of a redevelopment, you really want to work closely with community stakeholders, because you don't want to come in and just kind of, you know, be the bull in the china shop of that community. You want
Right.
to be a partner with that community, because
Right.
you want to have a good relationship with that community. You want the project to be successful. You want people in the community to feel good about what you're putting in there. It's not very popular to tear down an old industrial site and then put something on that that's also going to create contamination, right? So
Right.
people don't want you to pull down a power plant and put up a smelter. That's not, kind of what they want. So, yeah, so all of that's very important.
Yeah, that's great. And we're gonna take a quick break here, but when we come back, I want to continue chatting with you, get some more successes. I got a few other questions in my mind, but this is a fascinating topic because we think about real estate, and but people don't think about it from this angle about environmental components. But before we take our break, can you share your contact information in case any of our listeners, might have a need for your services? How are they best get a hold of you?
Sure. So you can go to our website, corporatelawpartners.com. You can email me, which is, so I'm Ann Viner. So it's my first initial A, last name Viner, V as in victory, INER, at corporatelawpartners.com. And if you get on our website, there's a contact us, there's our office phone numbers, things like that. But you can certainly always email me.
Email or website. Great. Well, I'll put that information not only on the screen for our YouTube and Rumble viewers, but also in the show notes so our audio listeners will be able to find your information. As I tell you every week, listeners, when you do reach out to Ann, make sure you tell her that you heard about her here on I Got a Guy podcast. It's a great way for us to close the loop on how this whole thing works and how we help everyone grow. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to take a short break, come back, and we're going to continue chatting here with Ann Viner from Corporate Law Partners about some environmental law things. So it's interesting topics. We'll be right back. We certainly hope you're enjoying this week's episode, and we'll return to this week's guest in just a moment. But now a message from our sponsor, Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions. If you own a fleet of vehicles, even if it's just 2 or 3 vehicles, GPS tracking is an important component for every vehicle. Here are the 5 top reasons companies invest in GPS tracking: driver safety, vehicle location, driver behavior, proof of service, and monitoring vehicle maintenance. Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions can enhance your growth and profit through the use of GPS tracking technology. Reach out to Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions at www.precisefleettracking.com. That's precisefleettracking.com. Or call 847-865-6008. That's 847-865-6008. Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions. GPS tracking made simple. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, we are back. Thank you for sticking with us. I am Michael Drelichars, host of I Got a Guy podcast. And this week, our guest is Ann Viner from Corporate Law Partners. And Ann is specifically a construction and environmental lawyer. But this firm, Corporate Law Partners, is an overarching law firm helping businesses get the needs that they need to run their business. And Ann has been doing a great job here since, like you said, 2016. You formed Corporate Law Partners. So, first of all, thank you for being with us, Ann. Appreciate that, and enjoyed our conversation thus far, and looking forward to some more interesting stories. So when we think about here in the Chicagoland area, there was recently a big issue with Chicago trying to house some migrants in a tent area, and there was some contamination in the soil. I don't know if you got involved in that in any way, or if you're familiar with that situation.
Yeah, I was not involved, but I've certainly read the news accounts about it.
Sure, but when there is contamination in soil, there are companies that have to come in and treat the soil, correct, to remove the contaminants.
Right. There's a lot of ways that we deal with contaminated soil, and they run the gamut. So the way that, whether it's soil or groundwater or any of or air, contamination, what we do in the environmental world is we look at the risk. What is the risk posed? So if there's a lot of soil contamination under a giant parking lot, okay, well, nobody can get to that soil. No one's eating it.
Kind of
No one
feel.
can
Yeah.
dig in it. Children aren't playing in it. So one of the ways that actually contaminated soil is dealt with is just capping it. And that can be things like a parking lot. It can be clean fill on top of it with vegetative cover, so landscaping. Um, there are also, but you've got to make sure there's no risk to folks from that. So if the contaminants in the soil are going to leach to groundwater and then flow off and maybe get into drinking water wells or volatilize up, as vapors into a building, which creates problems, indoor air problems, then you've got to do something more with that soil. You can't just cap it, right? So there are other things we do. There's injections, you basically insert bugs, microbes that eat the bad stuff. There's all sites of treatment. You can burn it. There's a lot of ways to treat contaminated soil, but the issue is always going to be, is it possible for those contaminants to get to someone, to create a risk to someone's health?
Sure.
So with the migrants, I mean, they, to the extent that they would be like on the soil, and had access to it with the tents and whatever, that's a problem,
No, yeah, absolutely.
right.
Yeah. So you have to have some really amazing chemists behind you and engineers that can give you all these facts and identify the risks.
Right. Absolutely. I could not do my job without all the ologists and ists that I've worked with. Um, I've been an environmental lawyer for 30 years.
Have you really?
And I have learned so much. So now I kind of talk the talk and walk the walk. Like I know,
Sure.
I can talk about karst geology and VOCs and karst geology, and I can throw out all the kind of technical terms, but only because I've worked with some of the greatest environmental scientists and consultants. And one of the things that I've been that I've done sort of my whole career is just, I don't have a science background. People
Really?
always say, oh, were you a chemistry major? No, I was not. So I have always said to the consultant when they're trying to explain to me what's at the site, what's the issue, what's the driving problem, I'll just keep asking the question until I fully understand it. Right.
Right.
And so the thing about engineers and hydrogeologists and things like that, who I'm huge fans of, believe me, I love these people, but they talk in their talk. They talk engineer, they talk scientist. And so I just keep asking them to break it down for me again, break it down for me again until I can kind of repeat it back to them in a manner that you can understand. It's like that show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Like, I'd like to be able to explain it to a fifth grader.
Right.
And so if I can understand it and get them to sort of break it down for me, then I can translate it, right? Then I can tell the lender, the mayor of the town, the buyer, right? But they are terrific, and
Sure.
it's super interesting. And I really just have to plug like STEM education in this country. We need these people.
Oh,
For lots and lots of other reasons, we need these people.
oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And I would imagine over the 30 years that you've been practicing in environmental law, the laws have changed drastically, and there's always new stuff coming out, right?
That is true. That is very true.
Yeah,
So just in my discussion, right, of how we look at the risk, when I started, we really didn't do that. It wasn't a risk-based cleanup. Like you might actually have to pull up the parking lot and dig out that soil, right? That doesn't really make much sense because then you're just putting that soil someplace else. Like it's so instead of so that's risk-based cleanup has been a huge development. We look for a lot more contaminants than we used to.
sure.
Um, Something like vapor intrusion, like I was talking about, where the contaminants in the soils can come up as vapor into your building.
Right,
That wasn't something that anybody looked at or considered, 30 years ago.
right,
Things like PFAS. Everybody's heard about PFAS, whether you're an environmental person or not. PFAS, PFAS, PFAS is in the news all the time. The forever chemicals, right? That's what those news stories talk about. Um, they're emerging contaminants. We've never looked for them. There are still not really standards for them, but in the next 2 to 5 years, there are going to be standards for them everywhere. There
good,
aren't right now. So yeah, things are always changing. A lot of those changes come also, frankly, from the community.
right,
Environmental is one of those things that people don't know a lot about. Not many people know an environmental lawyer. But you read about the issues in the newspaper, they're on the news, they're, in your social media feed. And a lot of it is community activist driven.
right,
It's people, it's like Love Canal back in the day. There was a whole community, Love Canal, New York, that everybody had cancer. It was really bad. And it spurred, really, frankly, some of the major environmental legislation in this country because those people, those residents stood up and said, wait, something's happening here.
right.
So that's kind of interesting too. You see communities being much more engaged on these topics, and I think that's generally good. People should follow the science and not just be scared when they don't necessarily need to be scared. But people don't know that. That's why it takes time to develop the standards, and that's why working with stakeholders, everybody, is really important. And I know my friends at EPA and in the various state agencies really believe in that. They really believe in trying to listen to the communities and also give the communities the right information.
Yeah. Well, and that's where your talents really benefit the communities because you're passionate about this. You have a knowledge. You have some great resources behind you with the science. Because I really agree wholeheartedly that um, you have to base it on fact. You have to have the right people behind you to really understand all the aspects of it, put it together, and be able to uh, discuss it at more of a layperson's level. So that the stakeholders, the community, the lenders, that's everyone can understand it at the same level. Not everybody speaks and understands at the level that these engineers speak at.
Right, right, right. So
Yeah,
I always say I'm a risk manager and a translator. That's what it comes down to.
yeah, yeah.
What is this giant, scary looking tank thing in the middle of this field, and what am I going to do about it? And I'm afraid of it, says my client. Well, I'm not going to be afraid of it. Like it's funny because I have a construction firm that was um, doing a construction in a hospital over a highway. The hospital actually went across a highway, so active highway, active hospital. They're doing construction over that, which they're not afraid of at all. They do stuff like that every day. They're a big construction company, right?
Sure.
But then if they found asbestos in that project, they would be like, whoa, right? Because that's not what they deal with every day. Which is kind of the interesting thing too about what I do is that construction and environmental go together. There are projects that seem like a construction project that are actually environmental projects dressed up as a construction project. Like, let's say we're going to take down an old coal-fired power plant. That is actually an environmental project that looks like a demo construction project, right? And then there's other things that really are more construction, right? You're gonna scrape soil, put in conduit, those kinds of things. And there may be contaminants in that soil, but really mostly that's a construction project. So that's kind of fun too, just to kind of
Yeah.
work on all the sides.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you had somebody that wants to put up a daycare, a child daycare in place of an old gas station, you're going to do some testing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Gonna do some testing. Probably they wouldn't be allowed to do that. Just probably it's not zoned for that.
Who knows?
But so if you were gonna do that, we'd do a lot of testing. We'd get a no further remediation letter that allowed that use to go forward, and there's a whole process for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the time, the gas stations become Walgreens and CVS's.
Sure.
So the old corners of Chicago that used to be gas stations are now all, those kinds of things.
Someday soon they may be charging electric charging stations too.
Oh, that would be okay.
But I just think about that every now and then because I've heard stories about old time gas station tanks rusting in the ground and seeping fuel into the ground, and
so every tank will leak. Just true. Every gas station will have overfills and spills, and again, it's what's the risk there? And
right.
like in Illinois, we have an underground storage tank fund, and there's a whole underground storage tank program with the Illinois EPA. So the fuel companies, gas station owners, et cetera, pay into this fund. So there's money there to remediate those old stations. And there's a whole program, and it works really well. We also have a dry cleaner fund and program in the state because dry cleaners use solvents back in the day. There's a lot of contamination around old dry cleaners. So we also have a whole program for that, as do most states. So, all of these things are really great, and they were just starting to come into being when I started practicing. And now, they just work.
Yeah. So, so that actually brings up another set of questions. First of all, there's federal EPA laws, and then each state has their own requirements.
Right.
And you could have customers that span multiple states, so you've got to stay on top of all these different state laws and the federal laws and understand how they interact together.
Yeah. Most of the state laws follow the federal, right? They can't be less restrictive.
Sure.
So California, for example, is way more restrictive on lots of things. California has way more environmental laws than any place else. I wouldn't handle necessarily something in California. I know great environmental lawyers in California, and I would just give my client to that person. But in general, we do work all over. I'm actually really active in the the National Environmental Bar Association, and so I actually have colleagues kind of everywhere. And I get a lot of referrals from folks out of state, from my environmental friends, and I give a lot of them too. We partner a lot. Like if I have a site in South Carolina, I've got a lawyer down there that I'm happy to work with on. Again, that's almost being like more of that outside general counsel role, whereas if I had a client with that, I'd say, listen, I'll work with this person, we'll work with this person. I've got the company knowledge. That person's got the local program law
Sure.
knowledge. I would also say there's also the local. The city of Chicago has environmental ordinances. Cook County has environmental ordinances. Departments of health. So a lot of the environmental laws are actually through the state departments of health or Cook County Department of Health. It requires certain permits for certain types of manufacturing operations. So there's a lot of boxes to kind of check.
Sure. A lot of layers there.
Yeah.
But they all generally work together with each other. All the different.
Yeah, they don't they don't really mostly conflict. There may be
Okay.
different reporting requirements, or there may
Sure.
be different timing requirements. Sometimes even in the federal laws, there's multiple statutes that address something. So you have to kind of parse out, are we really under all these things, and how do they work together or conflict, or are we more in this bucket or that one?
Sure.
It can be complicated.
No
You
doubt.
know, but that's what makes it interesting, right? If it was
Well,
easy.
yeah, most definitely. I mean, it does make it interesting, but it's a complicated business altogether. I mean, when you're talking about a development of a plot of land, I mean, it's that in itself is complicated, and then you add in the environmental component. But doing all that correctly, it's just better for everybody in general, the community at large, and so everybody wins when you do the right thing, get your ducks in a row, document everything, and just make sure that everyone's following the laws as they are written. Granted, they're going to change over time, but you just got to do the right thing, and everyone's safe.
That is such a good summary of exactly it. That what you just said is what I basically say to every one of my clients. That is exactly right, and it is getting the ducks in a row. It is documenting. You are absolutely right on every one of those points.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I mean, everybody wants to do the right thing.
That's right.
I I disagree with this idea that it's industry versus the environment. No manufacturer that I've ever worked with wants to contaminate. They don't want to dump out the back door. These are fictional, media created kind of stories. And maybe in the day, back in the 50s, because we didn't have any laws, nobody knew any better, but certainly not now. I like to say that, industry is green because it costs money to pollute. You get in trouble. It's and for the most part, people don't want to dump this stuff out the back door because it's a product. They've used it. They need it. If somebody has a spill, that's one thing. Spills happen, accidents happen. But this idea that somehow, they don't really care if they lose product that costs money. They don't want to do that. The
Right.
costs of an environmental problem are immense. They just are.
Absolutely.
So everybody wants to do everything they can to avoid those things and do the
Absolutely.
right thing. And my clients live and work in the communities where their facilities operate. They
Right.
are the community. They
Right.
don't want to harm their own families. They don't want to harm their workers. That's just not how they operate. So, I would just like put out that message that, it's not big, bad, awful manufacturing industry. It's people, it's complex to run a manufacturing facility. It's really hard from an engineering perspective, from just, a supply chain perspective, and everything we have is made somewhere in a
Right.
plant. Everything. So it's hard to always do it perfectly, and accidents do happen, but nobody wants to intentionally pollute. No one.
Right. And we think back to, 100 years ago, things are much different
Right.
environmentally. Manufacturing, there were, you know, massive
Yeah.
pollutants going in the sky, and people dumping things, but there wasn't the knowledge, the chemical knowledge, and there weren't the laws in place.
Right.
And so this is an evolution, and it's going to continue to evolve. But I also agree with you. I think, generally speaking, every business owner is in business to do the right thing. They want to, generate profit, and they're growing their business. They have a reputation at stake. They have their families at stake, and they do live in the communities oftentimes. So it's hard to imagine that anybody's doing that intentionally. So it's best just to work together, and let's figure out the best way to do this, minimize the risk for everybody, allow everyone to be safe and prosper.
Right. That also is exactly a perfect summary. I mean, I'm frankly just a very practical lawyer.
Yeah,
Um, we don't have. I don't want to make this problem a lifelong science, project. I don't want to make it into this theoretical, legal dissertation that theory. You have a problem, we can figure out the way to address it that protects human health and the environment, minimizes the risk to your business, maximizes the benefit to everybody, and we just want to get it done, right? So back to my widow farmer example, I need to get those tanks off her property and deal with that material and deal with the stuff that had oozed onto the soil, um, as appropriate, as required, and as quickly as possible.
right.
Because leaving it there a day longer is, so it's, I don't, and frankly, finding a way to reuse it was actually great.
Oh, that's a
Um,
huge win. Huge win.
yeah. So I think yeah, let's just figure out what the solution is and work toward it,
Yeah,
and work together.
yeah. Good for you. Well, that's awesome, and I really appreciate your passion and your experience. And I've never had to get involved with an environmental situation like that, but I'm sure many of our listeners maybe have. And I hope that if they have a need, that they would reach out to you and to your firm. And actually, if they have other legal needs. We've been talking a lot about environmental, but as we started the show, you talked about how you were outside counsel for corporations. So they may not have a need for building a facility right now, but they may still have a need for your legal advice. And so
Right.
the concept that I'm taking away from this is, as you mentioned a minute ago, you're a very practical, a pragmatic thinker, and I'm sure that's how your firm works in general. And so helping come up with solutions for businesses that need legal advice is really important. So
Right. Yeah, and I do a lot of standard construction contracts, other types of business contracts. I have another environmental partner. We have corporate attorneys. We have employment attorneys. Um, and, what we don't do, we've got great people, in our referral networks to do it. So,
sure, that's great. So why don't you share for our listeners again how to best reach you, contact you to get
sure.
started?
So you can email me at a Viner, V as in victory, INER, at corporatelawpartners.com. And then our website is also corporatelawpartners.com.
Great. And I'll put that information in our show notes so everyone can see that. And hopefully, when they reach out to you, they tell you about hearing you here on I Got a Guy podcast. Um, any last thoughts you want to share before we wrap up the show today?
I don't know. I think this has been fun. This has been very interesting. I would say that there are people who always have environmental issues, right? Because they're a chemical company, but then there's folks like the widow downstate. So you never know when somebody's going to be saying to you, I just found this old buried tank in the basement of my three flat. What do I do about that? Who
Right.
do I call about that? So I'm often the person that people call when they don't know what else to do with whatever they have just discovered. Um, so if you are at a dinner party and somebody's complaining about some weird thing they found in their back 40, you'll know to call me.
Very good. That's awesome. Well, I hope that if that happens, that they do reach out to you. But thank you so much, Anne, for being a guest this week. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed getting to know you, and you're a fascinating person with an amazing background, and I'm sure you have many more stories to share. So
Well, I
with
know that you have great stories and your business is amazing. So I really appreciate the invitation very much. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. And speaking of my business is Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions, and we are a GPS tracking providing company, and we work with business owners that own commercial vehicles. So we help these business owners enhance their growth and profit through the use of GPS tracking technology. And we have had some really interesting scenarios as well. Recently, we've been having issues with theft of assets, so we're helping businesses protect their assets. It's almost epidemic proportions. It's happening so frequently. So we're helping these businesses understand where their assets are, so they can recover them and not lose them. So if you happen to be a business that owns any type of asset like that, bobcats, skid steers, backhoes, trailers, etc., we would love to have a conversation with you to see how we can help you protect that. So we encourage you to reach out to us. You can find Precise Fleet Tracking Solutions at precisefleettracking.com. That's precisefleettracking.com, or call us at 847-865-6008. That's 847-865-6008. We can get the conversation started and see if we can help in some way. So thank you for that. But Anne, again, thank you so much for being a guest this week. We look forward to continuing our conversation. And to our listeners, thank you so much for subscribing, downloading the episode. I encourage you to share this on your social media platforms. And anytime you come across somebody that needs environmental law or any type of business law, Anne Viner, Corporate Law Partners, is a great place to start. So please reach out to Anne. But thanks again.
Thank
Make it a great
you.
week. All right, take
Have a
care.
great day.
You bet.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to I Got a Guy podcast. For past podcasts and more information, go to igotaguypodcast.com. That's igotaguypodcast.com. Please share this podcast on your social media feeds and tune in again next week to I Got a Guy podcast.